So, I'd like to welcome you to the Best Practices in Vocabulary Instruction for Students with Dyslexia and Language Related Difficulties workshop. It's hosted by the School of Education at VCU. My name is Lisa Cipoletti, and I'm a faculty member in the School of Education and serve as the Ruth Harris Fellow. This workshop is made possible by the Ruth Harris Professorship. Dr. Lou and Ruth Harris were committed to supporting the needs of school children with dyslexia and the professionals who support them. So as we begin, I would like to introduce our speaker for this evening, Beth Petzer. Beth Petzer is a learning specialist at the New Community School in Richmond and has been a language fundamentals teacher for grades 5 through 12 for the past 17 years. She has mentored new teachers and served as a language fundamentals chair. And as a learning specialist, Beth provides guidance in understanding student learning profiles and ways to customize instruction to meet individual needs. Beth has held a Virginia teaching license with an endorsement in specific learning disabilities, K-12, for 26 years. So thank you, Beth, for your presentation this evening.
All right, thank you. Thank you for that introduction, and I thank you all for being here tonight, taking some time out of your evening. I'm going to share my screen, so hold on just a second. There we go. And okay, I'm excited to talk to you all about what we do at the New Community School when we work with students with vocabulary instruction. And if I'd like to, I'd like to tell you all a little bit about my school. We are a school of 230 students in grades 5 through 12. Our population includes students with dyslexia and language-related difficulties, such as specific language impairments, receptive and expressive language disorders, central auditory processing disorders, dysgraphia, expressive written disorders, and attention difficulties that impede development of reading, writing, spelling skills. Our students have average to above average intelligence. They're college bound, and we help them with their language skills through our Keystone method, which is an Orton-Gillingham structured literacy approach. And we do that while we're also helping them discover and explore their strengths through our extensive elective and extracurricular program. Our small sizes enable us to customize instruction, build close relationships with our students, and then also get them to trust us to help problem solve and help them figure out how they learn best. One of the most distinguishing characteristics of our faculty is that we're trained and we have ongoing training, understanding so that we understand exactly the specific learning needs of our students. And when you teach students with dyslexia and language learning difficulties, there's one thing that you know, it doesn't matter. You just can't. You just have to engage them in active learning. So active learning is going to be a focus for my presentation today, and in helping students strengthen retention and recall for vocabulary. And I'd like to tell you a little bit about the plan. We're going to start talking about what makes learning difficult for learning vocabulary, difficult for students with dyslexia and language learning difficulties. We'll briefly touch on some research on effective vocabulary instruction, and then we'll talk about the techniques that we use. Specifically, we'll look at Nancy Hennessy. She's a literacy consultant, past president of the International Dyslexia Association, and author of the Reading Comprehension Blueprint. Helping students make meaning from text. Her techniques for vocabulary instruction are science-based, and the New Community School, we use the simple routine that helps students store those vocabulary words in their long-term memory when they're introduced, and the complex routine as we help our students develop depth of understanding, as well as fluency and efficient storage and retrieval for vocabulary words. We'll discuss how these routines help our students, and finally we'll wrap up with questions. And as I mentioned, the theme for today is actively engaging our students in learning vocabulary. So if you don't engage them in active learning, then you're just talking to them, and this is what you get. So who hasn't, I'm sure that we can all relate to how our brain just turns off when we're just listening to someone explain what a word means. So I want to get you thinking about ways you can engage your students in active learning. But tonight, ironically, it will be a challenge for you to engage as active learners on this webinar, because we aren't set up in this webinar to communicate through the chat. But I do plan to ask you to engage at times, to activate your prior knowledge, as well as your visual, your auditory, and kinesthetic senses, just as we would ask our students. And thank you for participating, even though I won't be able to see or hear you doing that. And just to get us started, I'd like to ask you to take a moment to think about your own experience with vocabulary. So let's take a walk down memory lane. Think back to when you were a kid, and what do you remember about vocabulary instruction? Do you have fond memories of learning new words? Which words were memorable to you? Do you remember getting lists of words with definitions each week? That's what I remember. I remember lists of definitions and a test at the end of each week on Friday. But when I think back, and I do have some memorable experiences, and one of them that really sticks with me was when I was in junior high school, which junior high started in 7th grade, and my 7th grade science teacher told my class that we were going to face trials and tribulations throughout junior high school. And we would have to navigate those trials and tribulations, which was very dramatic. If we were going to do well in her class, we'd have to be disciplined and figure out how to get through those trials and tribulations. And so my friend and I, we just loved like imitating her, and we'd be out in the hallway going trials and tribulations. And everywhere we walked, we'd be like, oh, I got a C on this test, trials and tribulations. Or maybe a friend had like broken up with a boyfriend. Oh, trials and tribulations, everything. You had a fight with somebody, you had problems with your parents, it was trials and tribulations. So that word really stuck with me. So I don't know if you have a memorable vocabulary moment from your past. If so, think about what made that word stick for you. And I think for me, it was the fun way my teacher introduced it, and she didn't have me memorizing the definition, but it just connected to my world around me, and I was using it all the time. So she helped me find a way to use that word a lot. So whatever your memorable vocabulary experience is, I hope you'll keep it in the back of your mind as we go through tonight to see how it fits with science-based vocabulary instruction. And then before we move on, I have one more question for you, and that is why? Why is it so important to talk about these strategies for vocabulary instruction? At TNCS, this is our why. So about 90% of our graduates go on to 2 to 4 year colleges. So we created a portrait of a graduate that highlights the skills we want those graduates to possess when they graduate and head on to college. This portrait is a discussion point in our advisories, and we have small advisory groups at all grade levels. And so the students are discussing what they are learning at any given grade and how it connects to who they are as a TNCS graduate. And we want them to, as it says there, adapt effectively, think innovatively, read strategically, communicate clearly, engage in community, and pursue wellness. But wait a second, did you notice there's no vocabulary in our portrait of a graduate? Where does vocabulary development fit in here? Why is it important? Well, I hope you're saying a student's thinking, reading, and communication skills are only as good as their vocabulary. In the book, Reading More, Reading Better, Are Americans Reading the Right Stuff? Marilyn Jager states the importance of a strong vocabulary. Words are not just words, they are the nexus, the interface between communication and thought. And so what makes vocabulary valuable and important is not the words themselves so much as the understandings that they afford. I've been listening to the Science of Reading podcast and recently heard Gina Cervetti, professor of education at the University of Michigan. She's done some research on integrating science and literacy instruction. She says we should think of vocabulary not as individual words, but as labels for the ideas that we want our kids to be talking about, reading about, and writing about. So it is all about communication, but it's also vocabulary knowledge. Vocabulary knowledge, is a robust predictor of reading comprehension performance. And so we know vocabulary is powerful. How many words are we talking? Well, according to Nancy Hennessy, the average high school graduate knows or recognizes 40,000 to 50,000 word meanings that have been acquired over their lifetime. So about 4,000 to 5,000 of those words are already acquired by the time the student first comes to school. And that means that the average high school student has to learn 2,000 to 3,000 words per year or 90 words per week. That's the average high school student. What do you think that looks like for the average graduate who is challenged by difficulties with reading, language processing, working memory, slow processing speed, attention deficit, and other struggles? These students aren't like the average student. Students with dyslexia and reading disabilities, they struggle to identify words. They don't automatically recognize the words on the page. A good deal of their mental energy is going to be devoted to decoding those words. So they can't read quickly. And when they encounter a new vocabulary word while they're reading, their working memory is just trying to decode the word. So they don't have the mental space to figure out the context clues and figure out what a word means if they've never encountered it. And now there are some students with dyslexia who are able to learn a great deal of vocabulary words because they have strong listening comprehension and they can pick them up. But then there are other students who struggle with language for a different reason. They may have a specific language impairment, the expressive or receptive language disorder affecting their ability to process, to understand, or communicate with spoken language. That might have a central auditory processing weakness, verbal comprehension weaknesses, and these students struggle to understand words. They don't learn vocabulary from listening to people speak around them, and they don't understand how to use context clues when they read a word. So language is difficult for them, and they require strategies to help them comprehend new words and scaffolding to connect those new words to concepts that they already know. Other factors that impede vocabulary development also include attention difficulties, as I mentioned, slow processing speed, and low working memory. And so I included this Scarborough's reading rope to highlight the types of difficulties that go wrong when when learning to become a skilled reader. What's getting in the way of a skilled reader for a student with dyslexia or language-related difficulties? Well, it might be word recognition at the bottom here, could be decoding or automatic sight word recognition. It might be language comprehension. They might struggle with one of these, or they might struggle with both. But regardless of their specific struggle, their vocabulary acquisition will likely be impeded either through their inability to access new vocabulary in print because they can't decode or automatically recognize words, or they're going to have difficulty processing, understanding, and reasoning with language, which will affect their vocabulary acquisition. So these students struggle with reading and vocabulary, and for them, reading is slow, laborious, and/or confusing. So in contrast, good readers do not struggle over words. They don't have to continually guess or sound them out. They immediately recognize words. They read fluently, fast and accurate. They focus on the meaning of the word, not how to sound it out. Good readers read 150 to 250 words per minute. They immediately recognize tens of thousands of words. Average readers require between 1 and 4 exposures to a new word before it's permanently stored for the immediate retrieval. But a dyslexic reader needs maybe 10 times, maybe 20, maybe more exposures. Good readers don't forget the words they learn, so strong readers keep reading more and getting stronger. The rich get richer, their vocabulary grows tremendously. And just like in the Matthew effect, meanwhile, weak readers, for all the reasons I just mentioned, fall behind. But there are things that we can do to help them. And so as we look at the science-based vocabulary instruction that Hennessy promotes through her book and webinars, and we use at TNCS, we need to keep in mind that these students, they need everything that she describes, but with increased intensity of instruction and increased intensity of practice and application of new word meanings and word learning strategies. They need more repetition, more exposure to the words. And they need access to reading through audio apps like Learning Ally and Audible, because wide reading is a major source of vocabulary growth when students become independent readers. So we need to foster independent reading skills through reading with their ears. All of our students at New Community have a subscription to Learning Ally, and if they aren't reading with their eyes, they're reading with their ears independently. So Nancy Hennessy says she has a four-pronged approach to helping students learn the vast amount of vocabulary words they need to learn before they graduate. One of the most impactful ways is through intentional instruction. We choose a word and we teach it explicitly. Intentional instruction is going to be the focus of today's presentation, but I'm quickly going to deal with the other three components and explain them. So incidental on purpose instruction is going to be when at the moment, like when you're in class teaching and you encounter a word that the student doesn't know, and you have to quickly give them a definition or explain how it fits into the conversation. Or structured teacher-student talk is elevating your talk. Instead of telling them good job, you might say what their solution that they just came up with, how beneficial it is, instead of saying good job. Structured shared reading, when you're reading together in class and you encounter a word that isn't one that you taught in the pre-reading. It's one that is just not important for you to do intentional instruction with, and just deal with that in the moment, tell them what it means. And structured independent reading, when students are reading on their own, if you can create a system where they are capturing the words that they don't know, whether they're circling them in their book or they're creating a notebook of words of new words that they're learning while they're independent reading. And then there's intentional independent word reading strategies. Learning strategies. So teaching the students to use online and offline dictionaries to research word meanings, pronunciations, and word origins. Using context clues to help students be able to recognize words in their independent reading. So for instance, learning signal words like but, how, and although are opposites. They indicate or they signal to the reader they're opposites. So if you have a sentence that says, my sister is compassionate, but sometimes she can be mean, and the students know that but means opposite, then they know that compassionate, even though they don't know it, must mean the opposite of mean, and that brings them closer to understanding. And using morphemic analysis, so teaching students about morphemes can be powerful. 60% of all word meanings can be predicted through morphemes, according to AIM Institute for Learning and Research. If we make an effort to provide structured instruction in morphemes, vocabulary growth will accelerate. So, for example, if you take the word immortal and you explain to the student, im is a prefix that means not, and mort is a root that means death, and al makes it an adjective describing something that doesn't die or live forever. And then the student can use that knowledge later on with other words like maybe mortician or mortuary to help them understand, what those words mean. And finally, we have a word consciousness that's underlying in the bottom here. And that's just an overall attitude that we have and that we instill in our students to encounter new words with curiosity and enthusiasm. We want them to develop an appreciation for word histories and relationships with other words, and communicate with words through a sense of humor, through wordplay and fun activities. So definitely in our English and our LF classes, we do a lot of wordplay with riddles and idioms and hink pinks and things like that. But all of the teachers were, it is our mission to help our students enjoy reading and develop a love for words as well. So we're all working together on that, developing that word consciousness. All right, let's see. So intentional instruction is, as I said, the focus of our presentation tonight. But before we get to the instructional routines, I want to briefly talk about word choice. First of all, we can't teach all the words. There's 90 words per week, as I mentioned earlier, is not realistic. For the average reader, many of those words will be learned through independent reading. Hennessy says, though, as far as teaching, should be 10 to 15 words a week. But how do you choose which words? And use these questions to help you help guide your thinking and your choices. Some basic 3 questions. Are they useful in the reading that you're about to do? Obviously, that's the most important. Can they be useful in what you're doing right now? But can they be helpful in the other classes that the students are in? Keep that in mind. And also, can they be useful as the student continues to grow in school? Are these good words for them to help them? Will they help them also understand, maybe learn more about morphology so that they can acquire and generate more understanding of words? And then Isabel Beck and Margaret McCune, author of Bringing Words to Life, explain the sweet spot of vocabulary is tier 2. We don't need to teach tier 1 words because they're spoken so frequently every day, but tier 2 words are frequently written in a variety of texts. So teaching words like analyze, synthesize, or tribulations, or derive, or absurd, or dignity, they help boost a student's understanding of text in a variety of academic subjects. And I've heard this they're called suitcase words, and that they travel with us from one subject to the next and one grade level to the next. So if you can teach those suitcase words, they can be very helpful. But at New Community, we're teaching the suitcase words, the tier 2, but we're also we're using the instructional routines that I'll be talking about tonight with tier 3 words as well. Words like medieval in world history, or cranium in health, and photosynthesis in science. There's so many words to teach. We can't teach them all, but we can be thoughtful in choosing the tier 2 words. So I've listed a couple of resources here for tier 2 words. The Co-Builders Learning Dictionary will actually identify words that are tier 2, and also online academic word lists. And also, I would say, as you choose words, consider collaborating with other teachers in your grade level and brainstorm what tier 2 words could be useful to your students for a particular grade. And then really quickly, I want to cover Hennessy's principles of instruction. They're built for deepening a student's understanding of vocabulary and also fluency in using a vocabulary word, using it in multiple contexts and using it reflecting their understanding of multiple meanings. And the key principles take us beyond the definitional and contextual information and help students deeply process the words through multiple activities and multiple exposures to targeted words. So it's repetition, repetition, repetition for our students who need so many multiple exposures to words. And now we're going to take a brief brain break, and I want to give you a survey of your word knowledge in just a second on a word that we'll be using. Vocabulary is on a continuum. You just don't know a word or not. It's not all or nothing. Learning vocabulary is cumulative because our knowledge of a word continues to grow. So teachers should survey their students, checking in periodically to see where they are on the continuum of an understanding of a word. So you can use this survey as an informal assessment before, during, or after instruction. Students could use this rating. I never met the word before. I've not seen it before or heard it. I've met the word, so I've seen it, I've heard it, it seems familiar, but I don't exactly, I couldn't tell you what it means. I'm friends with the word. I hang out together with it in the sense that I can use it. I can use it in my own language some, but I know some things, but I don't know all the meanings or all the contexts that it can be used in. And then BFF, best friends forever. I know all the meanings of this word. I know all the contextual situations that I could use it in. And yeah, I'm really good with it. All right, so how about you with this word? Let's see, take a look at this word. Maybe, is it gonna work for me? There we go. So here's the word amalgam. We're going to be using that today. And if you could rate yourself, where are you in that scale? And if I could see your rating, it would provide some good information for me as we get ready to do the instructional routine. So, all right. So one last word about intentional instruction before we go into instructional routines. It's one of the most impactful ways we can help students. Research tells us it's on us. 80% of all those words they have to learn by the time they graduate, it's on us. We are providing explicit multisensory instruction, lots of opportunities to practice those words. But wait, there's more. Did you know that if you want to really connect word learning to the long-term memory, you must join a new vocabulary word's meaning to its phonology and spelling? I would like to, I'd love to be able to see thumbs up if you, yeah, maybe I can see you. Thumbs up if you've heard this before. Yeah. So in his 2016 book, Equipped for Reading and Success, David Kilpatrick, who is a leading expert on reading difficulties, said that for more than 100 years, scientists thought vocabulary words were stored in long-term memory based on visual memory or meaning of words. But we know now that's not the case. Research shows that actually the letters we see with our eyes and the sounds we hear in a vocabulary word get processed together in the brain. And this is not the same as memorizing how a word looks or what it means. What scientists have learned is words are stored when we cement the phonological aspects, pronunciation, to the graphical or the spelling of a word, to the semantics or definition of the word in the student's mind. We're creating a strong and powerful amalgam that helps the student's working memory store the word for easily retrieval from long-term memory. This is called orthographic mapping. Research on reading in the brain that involved imaging the brain while reading has shown that when we learn a word, it's stored in the area of the brain that processes phonological information by sound. So we want to make sure for our students that we are helping them create strong connections to the phonology. Kilpatrick says, if a student keeps forgetting words he or she has learned, that indicates those words were not truly learned. Say a student passed a quiz or test, but now forgets the words. Those words were never learned in the first place. Who hasn't seen a student use this compensating strategy? I've given students tests and I can see them going, I'm going to look for that. I found the definition. I'm going to look for that long P word. Yeah, not the short P word, the long P word. There it is. That's the word that I need, and could get it right on a test. Well, if they're doing that kind of a strategy, if that's getting them through, they've not efficiently stored the word, and it's not, they're not going to be able to retrieve it. Most likely that's because the phonology, the orthography, and the semantics were never cemented together. So we want to make sure for our students that we're helping them create strong connections to the phonology and spelling, as well as definitions, so that words can be efficiently stored and retrieved from that location. A new community school teacher came up to me after I presented this information last year and told me about how terrible she was at remembering new names until she took a different approach. And when she met someone new, she started asking them their name, and then she would ask them to spell it. And she would visualize the letters as she said their name. And this worked like a charm for her. She started remembering everybody's names. And she said she didn't realize it, but she was capitalizing on orthographic memory to learn new names. So you might be probably saying to yourself, am I going to have to teach spelling of the vocabulary words in math, history, science? Well, yes and no. We should be introducing the spelling so that it connects to the phonology. Students need awareness of the spelling and the structure of the word. But students with language learning difficulties and dyslexia, they have varying spelling abilities. So we need to adjust our expectations for how far to go with spelling based on the needs of the student. Most students have the ability to sound out syllables. At New Community, it's a foundational skill that they work with in LF. Scaffolding the connection between the syllables and sounds in a word to the written letters will be important. So we're going to walk through the steps to do that, starting with the most important step first, joining the pronunciation to the spelling. So now here's where we take the science of reading and connect it to the instructional routine. So we're going to pronounce the target word and tie the pronunciation to the spelling, discussing the structure and the syllable patterns, the morphology, and we're going to use choral repetition, which aids the processing and recognition of sounds. And this synchronized activity strengthens the neural connections between the sounds and the letters. So we ask the student to repeat. Step 3, we explain the meaning of the word in everyday language. We provide examples in step 4 from different contexts and different situations, and use hand gestures to support working memory. Finally, in step 5, we're going to connect that phonology one more time by saying, spelling, and writing the word, and asking the student to do that. We'll do it ourselves, and we'll ask the student to do it as well. I'm going to take you through this in just a second. There we go. I'd like to credit the example that I'm using to Michael Hunter of Readsters, who I watched present at the Pennsylvania Literacy Training and Technical Assistance Network Virtual Literacy Symposium in 2022. It's the same simple routine that Hennessy outlines in her book, but I really like using the word amalgam that he had used because it fits so well with the way we're creating connections between the phonemes and letters. And so I use this to train in TNCS. And before we get started, I encourage you to pretend you are a student and actively engage in these steps so you can experience them as students need to. So class, today we're going to learn a new word. The word is amalgam. Would everyone say amalgam? Yes, great job. So Sabrina, could you say, I know, and just doing this at home, could you please say it for me? Great. And Phyllis, can you say it for me?
Amalgam.
Great. So pick on a few individuals to say it. And now we're going to focus on the sounds of the words. How many syllables do you hear in the word amalgam? Well, nice. I see somebody holding up 3. Nice job. Yes. And for every sound, every vowel sound we hear, we have a syllable. And yes, we have 3 syllables. So there they are, amalgam. And now you could tap or pound it out from left to right. I like to tap. So it's amalgam, or you could go amalgam and scoop under amalgam. All right, so we're getting the students to do this with us, and every time we say amalgam, they're saying it with us. So, Sonia, what was the first syllable again? It was right, good. And Diane, what was the second syllable? Mal, good. And the third syllable, Sabrina? Gum, right. Okay. And so we would go back and I've got these here, amalgam, great. And then we'll just keep asking. And so I might ask Sam, what's the middle syllable again? And he would say mal. And then Jim, what is the last syllable? Gum. And just kind of constantly pulling them out of order and getting them to connect. What's the first syllable? So as they think of these syllables out of order, they're just practicing the connection of those sounds to the letters. And then finally, before we move on, everybody together, let's repeat the syllables in order. Amalgam. Great. All right. And now that we have thought about the sounds in the words, we're going to connect the sounds to the spelling. So say the first syllable. What is that first syllable? Right. And how do you spell it? Yes, A. Good. And what's the second syllable? Mal, right. But how do we spell it? M-A-L. Good. And what's the third syllable? Gam. And how do we spell it? G-A-M. Oh, and I said gam, but we really say gum. But I like to think of it as gam because it helps me remember how to spell it. But speaking of that, so wait, first of all, let's just say we've just spelled amalgam, and I didn't make you have to guess this or pull it out of the air. We had the letters right there. We're looking at it. We're talking about how it's spelled. So no tricks there. But if you want to extend and deepen their ability to spell this word, you're going to want to look at anything unusual about this word. Well, what do we notice about the vowels? They all have the same vowel, right? But do they all have the same vowel sound? And the first syllable is saying the second syllable is saying it's got a short sound, and the last syllable is kind of a match to the first syllable as a schwa sound. So it's a nice visual for us to remember there's three A's. That's the only vowel in this word. But then there's that thing about the sounds, and that's helpful to notice. So now that we've thought about the word, let's just practice it again. So what was the last syllable in our word? Gum. And then how do we spell it? G-A-M. And then what was the first syllable? And how do we spell it? A. And what was the middle syllable? Mal. And how do we spell it? M-I-L. And what's the last syllable? Gum. And how do we spell it? G-A-M. And now, as we wrap up, let's spell the whole word. Everybody say the word together with me, amalgam. And now let's spell it. First syllable is and we spell it A. Mal, M-A-L, gum, G-A-M. And after you play around with this, I mean, it didn't take us very long. We're done with this. You could, some students get real competitive and they might want to see if they could spell the word backwards. But in any case, they have had a good practice with the connection between the sounds and the spelling. And we're going to move on to step 3, where we're going to talk about the word in everyday language. And this word has 2 definitions, and we're going to start with the concrete definition first and move to a more abstract. And we're going to talk about if we have any morphology that we can talk about, we'll talk about that. So this word amalgam comes from the Greek word malagma, meaning softening substance. And then in medieval Latin, as time went on, it was the word amalgama, which meant a soft mass made by chemical manipulation. So it was something soft, mercury and another metal, either silver or gold, that became very soft and malleable. And that makes sense because an amalgam is soft enough to mold into a tooth to fill in a cavity. So I have an amalgam in my mouth. I have several of them on the top and bottom, filling the cavities that I had when I was a kid. And I was looking around to see if we still make amalgams with mercury, and sure enough, some people still are making them with mercury, even though we know mercury is not good for our body. I don't think it actually gets into your body. And then I would move on after talking about the amalgam in my tooth and talk about more about how when I'm listening to the radio, I don't like to just listen to one era. I like to listen to an amalgam of music. And so I'll listen to a channel that has maybe 70s and 80s and 90s music. And so we could also use a hand gesture and say for amalgam, it's a mixture or a combination. So we could pretend we're mixing something in a bowl. And now we're ready for step 4, which is using lots of examples. Lots of visual examples. So we have my music example up there, the amalgam, the mix, and then also my other example is an amalgam of cultures and ages. What other examples can your students think of? See if you can get them, and maybe they need a little perking up. Maybe they can't just do it off the top of their head. So you can set them up with situations, and you can say, okay, and this is a pretty easy, you're giving them examples still, but it helps to light a fire. The dentist fills your cavity with the blend of mercury and silver. The dentist fills it with everybody together, amalgam. And you are listening to your parents' favorite 70s, 80s, and 90s radio station. You hear an amalgam of music. You decide to make trail mix from scratch. You create an amalgam of peanuts, raisins, and M&Ms. You watch a school performance that blends dance, singing, and acting. You enjoy an amalgam of entertainment. The potluck supper had a combination of foods from macaroni and cheese to zucchini casserole. You tried an amalgam of food at the potluck supper. And I have an activity like this where that was pretty easy because it's brand new learning for them, but where they have to come up with the examples, and we'll get to that in a little bit. And finally, step 5, those students are actually going to physically write it, make it a kinesthetic experience, whether it's if you have somebody who's has difficulty with spelling, maybe you're just going to use the dry erase board, or if you have a system where you have note cards or a place where you're keeping vocabulary in a notebook, that's a great time then to get the student to write the word and say it. And then, let me back up and say, that's at the end of the simple routine day 1. And so after day 1, you're ready for the complex routine, which is day 2 and beyond, 2, 3, 4 and beyond, and always constantly coming back to it and connecting it with new knowledge. So that complex routine, it provides the student a rich understanding of the word through multiple opportunities to build connections between words and experiences. Sorry about my grandfather clock, but I'll just keep going through. So we're gonna build connections to words we already know. We're gonna use visuals and make it kinesthetic, and as well as visual, we're gonna make connections to morphology. Let's take a look at how we're gonna do that. So Nancy Hennessy emphasizes that this routine should, in the connect column, connect words to other words that you already know, the student already knows, and then represent and use are going to be visual and kinesthetic opportunities for them to use the words in varied context. I'm going to work from right to left. So I'm going to start with use and represent, and then we'll move to connect. So I can give you some examples of what we do at New Community. First of all, as promised, this is another on day 2. You can go back and see if they can come up with the examples. So you have a cavity, you might get an amalgam of, and have them fill that in. And if we were interacting, I would get your ideas. You are feeling creative in the kitchen, so you might make an amalgam of, what would you do? You go to a Flying Squirrels baseball game, you might see an amalgam of what? You take a walk in the woods, you might hear an amalgam of, what kind of sounds would you hear? And you're preparing to study for an exam, you might try an amalgam of study strategies. Now in the use and represent column, multisensory instruction is at the heart of the New Community Schools best practices. We live this. We know you just can't use verbal instruction to teach vocabulary. The students need to hear it, see it, say it, feel it, act it, draw it, use it, rehearse it. And so when we bring a new word into the brain through those 3 channels, visual, auditory, and kinesthetic, we give that brain the opportunity to more accurately perceive the information that's coming in and to store it into long-term memory so it can be easily retrieved. Thumbs up if this information sounds familiar. Yeah. All right, so we keep students engaged in a variety of multisensory experiences, and here's some examples. So one example is students act out their vocabulary words and connect them to their prior experiences and previously learned words. So I'm going to show you a couple of quick videos.
Adversity, hardship, or challenge.
And then we got this one here. Those are our antagonists.
I don't know about him stealing these snacks, but mixed feelings about that.
Adversity. Hardship.
Sorry, that one keeps going. I think that the New York Times has a site where they've had competitions where high school students make videos for their vocabulary, and I think these guys they had looked at them and they were, trying to compete with that. All right. Also, hold on one second. Students use things like sound cards to analyze the structure of words. They match word cards in vocabulary to visuals and definitions. So this is looking at the structure of words. This is looking at, this is where she's just simply matching up in this middle box here. She's matching visuals to the definition and the word. And then down below, we have a student who is learning about Jean or Jen which means birth or race and morphology, and also Manu for hand. He is looking at multisyllable words and trying to sort them by what base that he's by base. So the Jen words and the Manu words. And then in the bottom right-hand corner here, this student is matching visuals for vocabulary to sentences of different contextual sentence for the word. So he's matching the word to the sentence to the visual. And then up above here, these are some students who are doing a flashcards and straw as activity. It's a divergent thinking activity. They're connecting their vocabulary with straws to show relationships between the words. Their words were vast, specific, tend, urgent, ridge, and dangle. And so as they laid them down, they kind of made up a little story or sentences for themselves so that they could make the words more memorable. And they said, if you dangle from a ridge, you may need urgent care. Someone could tend to you, but they would need to know your specific location because the mountains are so vast. And so just another way for them to make connections with those words. And let's see. And then this activity is a morphology exercise. Students, as I mentioned a minute ago, they were working with man or Manu as a bound base, meaning hand, and Jean meaning birth or type. And after they did the sorting activity, they actually had the colored stickies. Green is, let's see if I can find, I think green is for prefixes, bases are yellow, and suffixes are pink. And so they are making words with those bases. And they create the word on the table, and then if they get approved, which this student hasn't gotten approved yet because he's needs to still work on it, then they get to put it up on the board, and each block here is a different class, and they're competing with other classes to see who can create the most words. And so anyway, it's just a great way for these students to learn about morphemes. And the cool thing is that I've heard other teachers, like the history teacher and the science teacher, say that does it come from LF? They come into LF talking about the morphemes, and they carry their learning in there, and they're always looking at their vocabulary words in the content classes and hypothesizing what the word means based on the morphology. And so they're building connections in their lexicon. And by the way, what is a lexicon? Well, whoops, sorry, my bad. I think I skipped. Let me give you this one. They're building a lexicon even with this. I had a couple of other examples that I threw in here and I forgot. This is one, we have a music teacher who has to teach dyslexic students and students with language learning difficulties words like andante, as he's teaching them how to be walking in a medium slow tempo while they're playing their instruments, their guitar or whatever instrument. And so his strategy is he actually will literally have them walk, and then they will play at a walking pace, and then he'll tell them the word. So it's not visual, it's more experiential, and he waits to tell them what the word is on Dante until they've experienced it, and then they learn what it is and what it's called. And then he also uses Canva to create visuals for his vocabulary pianissimo, fortissimo, and he's for the mouse is for the soft, and the elephant is for the loud. So that's a teacher-made visual. This is student-made visuals in our anatomy class for our 10th and 11th and 12th graders. The teacher has printed out visuals for them, and they cut them up and they put them on their flashcards, so that they could remember in this particular case that the what is it called? The sternocleidomastoid and levator scapulae muscle and trapezius are all connected to the cervical spine, and that's where the straws are all pointing to. In history, in world history, the world history teacher for 9th grade was having some trouble getting her students to remember what Reformation was. The Reformation period being that period of history where Martin Luther was trying to get the church to reform. And so, so she just pulled out paper one day and said, hey, form something with this piece of paper. And some people made airplanes, some people did origami. And then she said, now I want you to reform it. And you don't have to totally change it, but you're going to reform it to make it better, because Reformation just means make it better. And so afterwards, the student made it better, not by actually changing too much of the physical, but actually adding color and stripes and whatnot to it. So she said, it was a very effective activity for them. And then finally, up above here, when students learn words, we're very pretty routine about having them draw and illustrate the vocabulary word. Okay, and back to, this was all to make a lexicon, which, by the way, what is a lexicon? It's actually a dictionary, but we're talking about today the dictionary in our brain. It's our mental dictionary where we can, where our words are stored. And we know that automatic sight word dictionary, it's in the area of the brain that processes phonological information. But once the brain knows a word, it begins to build networks that strengthen in the understanding of that word, making the lexicon robust. So how do we build that? I've been showing you. And also, I just want to take a little side trip here and just point out that when a student learns, like the word duck, when a child learns the word duck for the first time, it's connecting a visual image, a spelling, and a pronunciation. But then over time, we connect new experiences and vocabulary to this duck, and we learn that it can swim, and it has 2 legs and 2 wings, and it can quack, and it can fly, and that there's different kinds of ducks. There could be imaginary ducks and real ducks and different kinds of ducks and other birds that it's related to. And notice that there's 2 systems going on. There's the dual coding system theory asserts that images are pairing with the verbal and the imagery are pairing together, and to help us store a word and really hold on to it. And so the lesson is simple. We need to use pictures and images whenever possible when we're teaching vocabulary. And so that visuals enhance memory, and our lexicon is one important takeaway, but note the many and varied associations between words and images that strengthen memory. So a striking metaphor is that of a real spider web. When an insect flies into it, the more strands it touches, the greater the likelihood that it'll stick. And Cervetti said, it's hard to teach words if they're not connected to something. If we think of the mind as having webs of understanding, and those webs are there to catch new words or ideas, then in the absence of those words, a word becomes just a piece of information without a home. And that's not an efficient way to build substantial and durable vocabulary knowledge. If we want words to stick in the lexicon, we need to attach them to as many strands as possible. And so So there we have some different semantic maps. You may have seen them before, but look, they have the advantage of mirroring how words are stored in our lexicon. They're particularly helpful for students with language difficulties because they help them see the new vocabulary and how it fits into the network of words they already know. They visually represent the relationships between words and concepts, and it helps them with their visual spatial systems that aid memory. This is just an example from our 8th grade physics class. The student is categorizing force as a push or a pull and giving and naming other things that it's like. Gravity, friction, electromagnetism, and then gives 3 different contextual examples. You can push off the ground to go forward on a scooter, or Reagan pulls the table to bug Mrs. B, or Margot pushes the shopping cart at Target. And also on day 2 or 3, or day 2 of having learned amalgam, you could create a word study diagram with the whole class. They could be doing this together. You're going to list out your synonyms, list out antonyms, there's the relationships, there's synonyms and antonyms, and then more sentences, have them generate more sentences and generate some more visuals. Making connections is going to, again, make words more sticky. That's what we want. And here's a Freyer model, which a lot of our teachers use this. I've seen this in a lot of different content classes. And you put that word in the middle and you've got essential. First of all, there's lots of different variations on this map. This is one where you have essential characteristics on the upper left and non-essential. It's not essential that birds fly. They can still be a bird without flying. You have your examples of birds, and then you have your non-examples, which are able to fly, but they're not birds. So that's just an example of a Freyer model. And here is an example of new community Freyer model. This was 9th graders that are working on Wordly Wise book, and they're not just reading the definitions and doing the workbook, they're doing activities with their unit before they test out on them. And also, if you notice here on the left, we have our AI guru at our school, and he sent out a message today and he said, hey, look, I found this AI graphing tool and you can use it to make semantic maps. And so I would just encourage you to experiment with that. And it's Instagraph.ai. So just something to keep in mind and play around with. Wouldn't that be great to just have them make the semantic maps for us? And then this is another taking the Freyer model and making it manipulative for our students. So these are some 10th and 11th graders who are working with some words, and they turned the chart into a puzzle. And so that was a really good manipulative activity for them. And these are more charts that the 9th graders are using with their Wordly Wise. That includes a visual that they have to create. And then I also want to mention word sorts. Getting kids to manipulate word cards and making those connections is just really, really good, deep practice for students. I have 2 examples. I have the insect over here. A closed word sort you've got the headings already given for you, parts and stages. This closed sort, it's got the points, planes, and lines. The headings are there. And so in a closed work, it's more of a scaffolding, helping your students. They don't have to, they don't have as much cognitive load on them if they don't have to worry what the headings are if you've already given them to them. So the more complex information, or when they're still learning it, give them the headings. And it's a great activity to get them to activate background knowledge, and it gets them interested and it gets them talking about whatever topic that you're on. Really enjoy doing closed sorts with students. And then here is open sorts, which is engages the student in a different way. It's divergent thinking. And this kind of sort could come as an introduction to a unit and then later as a review. This example it's got kind of like heavenly bodies, and it's got planets and stars. And the teacher could just provide these and say, you are going to make up your own groups here. Let's see what you can do. And if you're not sure of a word, you could even say, I'm not sure. And in this case, let's say this is a teacher who's getting ready to introduce stars or supernova and white dwarf, and wants to see what the students already know and how they connect it. And so this is a possible word sort that they might come up with. Maybe they sort all of the ones that moon, planet, asteroid, meteorite are all things that can go into orbit, whereas the others on the right-hand column are all things that produce light. So they're getting an opportunity to repeatedly to talk about these words, to talk about the relationships, and to play flexibly with them. And it's all just good processing and practice, and exposure to the words before, during, and after a lesson. And as I think I've already talked about the benefits, so I'm going to move on through. And then there's two other sorts that I have, and this one here is like a hybrid between the two. It's a hybrid between closed and open. You've got your headings, fractions, decimals, ratios, proportions, but you have the ability to, the students have the ability to debate which one has the most contact. So maybe they say denominator and numerator belongs in fractions, but one student says, well, division belongs in fractions. But another student says, well, it also belongs in decimals and it belongs in ratio. And as they justify it, all of the discussion that happens around the vocabulary words is very rich and helps make those words stickier and make that lexicon more robust. By the way, this activity and several of the semantic maps I have as links that Sabrina is going to share with you at the end. I think I put the AI tool in there as well. And then my last one, I would like to have, I also don't have enough time to talk about the semantic feature analysis other than to say that when you can group vocabulary words and play them against the different features, this is especially helpful in tier 3 words where you have a unit and you can compare vocabulary words across different features. Again, as the students get to talk about them, just deeper processing of the words and more practice with them to build their fluency and their recall and their use of the word. And now all of these techniques, they have 3 things in common. They have clusters of related words, they encourage students to categorize, and they are connecting the prior knowledge that they have to the new information. So I would just encourage you to think about ways that you could use those 3 kind of principles or techniques and combine them to come up with other ways to help students more deeply process the words that they have and strengthen their understanding of their words. And then finally, to recap, we've talked today about the simple routine is day 1 when you're linking phonology, orthography, and semantics. And day 2 is when you're trying to have them make relationships with what they already know and what they're learning, and you're getting them to represent and use them in vocabulary words with visual, auditory, and kinesthetic senses. And that will lead you to better understanding of words and better word choice in in writing and discussion, conversation, and long-term retrieval. So I think that's about it for me right now. Do you have questions? Oh, wait, before I do questions, let me just say there's QR codes here. This one here is the semantic maps links, but Sabrina also has it. I cannot recommend enough the chapter 4 from the blueprint, the reading comprehension blueprint. Chapter 4 is got all of this and so much more of what we've talked about today. Then there's a QR code here for TNCS as well as for my contact information. And now I'm ready to open it up for questions.